Devon Rufo is a grower, maker, and post-capitalist dreamer, a vessel for change, a conduit for imagination, and a simple bricklayer dedicated to building bridges toward a more just and equitable future for all beings. Devon spent the first part of his career in the fashion industry, working in design and product development for well-known brands from startups to Fortune 500 companies. After observing the environmental and social atrocities perpetuated by the fashion industry, he pivoted to sustainability work to try to push back against exploitation, overproduction, and overconsumption. Devon is a senior consultant for one of the world's most preeminent environmental consultancies. He works to help fashion brands understand their scope of impact on the world and design holistic pathways towards bringing business into alignment with planetary and social boundaries. Today, we're exploring why corporate sustainability efforts and incremental change isn't enough. We'll dig into the root causes of modern day crises, including the climate crisis, and explore why embodied imagination and community are crucial to creating a new world. Welcome, Devon. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you, Jaclyn. I'm so excited to chat with you as well.
Well, let's start with this really meaty question of why
Okay.
sustainability, particularly corporate sustainability, and just these like baby bite-sized steps aren't enough.
Sure. That is a super loaded question. So I'll try to break it down into bite-sized pieces, right? I think the main reason why corporate sustainability efforts as they exist today and incremental changes aren't enough um, is because corporate sustainability doesn't address the underlying cause to all of the crises that we're currently facing as a society, as one shared planet, right? Um, Corporations, at the end of the day, exist within the underlying system of capitalism, right? Um, Corporate sustainability is an incredibly important starting point, right, for getting all of the players in the world who are really creating the damage, right? Human damage, environmental damage, really the perpetuators of destruction, right? Corporate sustainability is a starting point. It's a way to begin engaging with conglomerates, with those that are really responsible for the climate crisis, right? For social justice issues. And so we have to find a point to begin engaging and begin leading companies and using their power and influence and money, right, to reduce emissions, to improve the livelihoods of folks,
Yeah.
all almost 10 billion of us, right? um, Everyone is a piece of the value chain, what we like to
Mm,
call it in business speak, right? Um, and billions of people are directly exploited every single day
mm,
by the corporations that are leading the way, right?
yeah.
So yeah,
And
it's a yeah. Go ahead. Yeah,
yeah. So you've worked in fashion,
yeah.
and that's really what brought you to sustainability work. So I'm wondering if you can sort of like, yeah, explain to us what that looks like in the fashion industry in particular, both um, maybe starting with like the climate impacts.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start out by just kind of like giving a little tidbit into like just my personal
Yeah.
observations and experience working in the fashion industry, right? I want to just remind that like I'm just speaking on behalf of my experience, what I've seen, what I've listened to, what I've heard over time. Most of my thoughts and perspectives, right? Like these thoughts are not my own. They are an amalgamation, a weaving of thoughts, ideas, writings of some brilliant folks within the space. But yeah, I'm here to share my story. Um, so yeah, working in the fashion industry, I spent, a good 10 years or so working in design and product development, as you said before. from small startups that are actually will go unnamed, but on the ethical side of things, um, to up to huge Fortune 500 corporations. Most folks listening will probably know the brands that I've worked for. And this thread that continued through my entire experience in design and product development is this constant churn for creating more and more and more and more stuff, right? And it took me a while to really tap in to understand, like, to take a pause, right? To understand, like, what is the impact of all of this stuff that we're doing, all of this stuff we're putting out into the world. And I think something that was really critical for me, um, and why I feel drawn to the fashion industry, right? Is that I spent a lot of my career traveling around the world, going to factories. I've spent a lot of time on factory floors in Asia, in South America, in India, all over the place where we produce clothes, right?
Yeah,
Um,
where it
and
starts.
yeah, exactly. And you see things that you cannot unsee, right?
Mm,
When you're spending weeks in a factory developing samples, developing the next collection, I think I've developed 20 collections at least within my career, right? And it's just this constant churn of like, what's the
yeah.
next thing? What's the next thing? How can we sell people more stuff, right? Well, then you go to the factory, right? And you start meeting the people who are actually making all of this happen.
Hmm.
When you meet the people who are facing and living with the economic impacts, the environmental impacts, the health impacts that this
Hmm.
industry causes, it's a dark, it's a dark thing to see, like having
Yeah.
conversations with factory workers who have a 50, 60-year life expectancy. They're retiring at age 40, 45 because of all of the chemicals that they're inhaling when making
Yeah.
your clothes. When you go to these sort of like manufacturing epicenters within these locations, these different countries, you step off a plane, right? And suddenly the air smells like chemicals, manure, burning tires, all of these like toxic, the air is toxic, right? You go up to the factory and you see rivers that are blue, that are foaming, that have no life in them, right? And then you
Yeah.
see people bathing in those rivers, right? And it's so it's so sad. It's
Mm,
so heartbreaking. And I think developing that connection to the source and really living in the supply chain and understanding how the things we consume, especially as Americans who consume by far the most amount of clothing compared to the rest of the world, like three times more than the next highest country. This is what we're
mm,
getting at here. Um, you realize that like me as a designer, as a product developer, I am actively perpetuating violence against folks who are at the start of our supply chain, against folks throughout the entire supply chain, right?
yeah.
Um, and I chose to not be a part of that anymore, right?
Mm,
And not only to not be a part of that, but to utilize my understanding of the industry, my understanding of the supply chain, um, to try to shift the industry in a safer and a better direction, right? Um, and that's sort of where we get to this like tension, right? Coming back to what we said about is corporate sustainability enough?
yeah.
Excuse me, no, it's not, right? It's not enough. It's a
Yeah.
good starting point. Yeah, like we can
Mm.
help
But it doesn't
com
address that root, like, and that's the thing is like I feel like so much sustainability is like just trying to show that we've done something and often oriented
Mhm,
towards like, oh, this is made of bamboo and like something where it 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 feels good to the consumer, but it isn't
mhm,
actually impactful. And
mhm.
I know you have freaking stats on that. But the thing I want to name this idea that was first introduced to me by Dr. Paul Farmer, who's
Mm,
um, a doctor and a anthropologist, and he really brought just small tangent. He was like the first person to like start treating people with HIV in the global South back when drugs were very
mm,
expensive,
mm,
and helped like change policy. Anyways, he has a term and it's called structural violence, and it's systemic violence that, is really from the top down and results in, more maybe more, you know, experiences of health conditions, of dying early, of just suffering in
mm,
many ways, in all the possible ways that you could economically, and when I hear you describe like the origins of the fashion industry, like what I hear is the way that companies cause structural violence to both in the United States, but also globally in a way of like modern colonialism, so that we can feed this American hunger for consumption, which is really a way that we're like trying to escape suffering by buying our way to happiness. And like the whole supply chain doesn't work. And we haven't even mentioned the climate. So, eek, that's rough. Hence why corporate sustainability is not enough.
yeah. Exactly, because of overproduction, because of overconsumption, right? We are constantly trying to sling more stuff. And this is, zooming out a little bit more to like the underlying like capitalist framework, right? Like especially late stage neoliberal capitalism. Like the objective of business is to grow profitability, short-term quarterly profits, right? Um, when you build the growth imperative into, and this is something like when I'm doing the actual like my consulting work, right, and I'm looking at like integrating um a client's growth objectives, right, into their sustainability plan. Once you bring that growth percentage in, even a meager 2 or 3% growth objective year over year makes any sort of climate mitigation
Yeah,
so much harder to do when you're
because
looking
it'd be
at
more
10, 20
expensive, and
years out,
so they don't want to do it.
because the volume of what you're doing to the world
Yeah, is so big. Yeah.
is canceling out the progress you're able to make
Wow.
when it comes to transitions to renewable energy, transitions to more sustainable materials, transitions to cleaner chemistry, right? There is a time horizon here. There is a build to this, and like when we look at like climate mitigation, just as like one sector or one focus area, right? Like climate change and carbon emissions is like one it's important, right? But it is one piece of the overarching systemic cause, the overarching causes to um, the environmental and social destruction that we face currently as a society, right? But carbon emissions alone, we need to reduce impacts in an absolute way, right? So when we look at the science and we look at like the Paris Accord, right, and we're
Hmm.
working toward that like 1.5 degrees Celsius boundary, which we've already surpassed. We'll be lucky if we can get to a 2 degree C, right? Very lucky based on the way that we're currently moving um, as a society. Um, very lucky if we're able to stay within that boundary.
Yeah.
Um, and the more you grow, the growth imperative, the need for corporations to continue selling more and more products
Yeah.
in order to make more and more money means that it's harder and harder and harder to reduce your absolute emissions impact on the world,
Mm,
right?
hmm. Right, because you'd have to fundamentally change like business models. Like
Right.
instead of us all buying new shit every year, we wouldn't. We would buy fewer things that would hopefully maybe last longer.
Correct.
And like, you know, it would literally render the profits of many companies, like it would reduce them. And who would want to, why would they do that when they could
It
make money
wouldn't.
now?
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
why? Like, sorry planet, sucks to suck, but there's money to make now, and so we're going to
Exactly.
keep doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think back, I love and 10 out of 10 recommend this as a required reading. Um, Not because it is the be all and end all or like the
Yeah.
origination point of this idea of like degrowth, right? Or post growth. I like to call it post growth. I think degrowth has a branding issue, um,
Mm, yeah.
because when you take the word degrowth and put that into a corporate context,
It's not going to
everybody's
work.
like, no, don't say that. It's never going to work, right? Everyone gets scared of this idea of like degrowth. It means we can't make anything anymore. It means we can't, like, growth is the way that our world works, right? It's a very shocking term to understand.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks get really sidelined and really caught up in this idea of like fighting against this idea of like slowing down growth, right?
Hmm.
Which, as a sustainability practitioner, as a spiritual person that is very like tapped in, I would say, um, to feeling and observation, even just understanding how the earth works, how all living beings on the earth work, there is a limit to growth for
Yeah.
every single living entity on this earth. Why do we think
The
that we can grow
audacity.
forever? The audacity, the
Yeah.
arrogance
Yeah.
of
The,
humanity to think that we can grow forever
yeah.
is mind-boggling.
When really what it is, this is the universal truth. Is like, it's a balance, it's a harmony, it's many different things working together in a way that supports their mutual thriving. And that if any one of those things became cancerous and took over, it ruins
Mhm.
everything else. And that's what we're seeing with our planet.
Of
Is like,
course.
across the board we have, changed ecosystems from just completely shutting down forests and wildlife to monocropping, like really only growing of set things, especially like we're cutting down the Amazon to
For
what's
beef,
the, yeah,
for
it's like,
beef and
oh,
leather,
and that one tree,
we're
palm,
cutting
what's the palm
down the
oil?
world's
Yeah, it's
lungs
the
for
world's
beef and
lungs.
leather. We're
Cool,
chopping down
cool.
all of the indigenous forests throughout like
Yeah.
Asia, right, to grow palm oil, a monocrop,
Mm-hmm.
that leads to obviously the depletion of soil health, right? The depletion of
Yeah.
biodiversity. It leads to like an incredible increase in like forest fires, for example. Like without
Yeah.
that biodiversity, like you get stronger and bigger burns, which then create more carbon emissions in the atmosphere. It's like this vicious cycle, right? And it all
Mm,
ties back to overproduction and our relationship,
yeah.
to the earth and to each other, right? Monocropping is something that I could get really, really into. I
Mm-hmm.
personally, I love gardening. Gardening is, my peace space. It's also just, it's a space of imagination, right? It's an experiment in what could be. And so within my garden, my intention is always to try to just feed and nurture the soil, plant the
Mm,
seed, and see what happens, you know?
mm-hmm.
It's an experiment in developing as much biodiversity as we can possibly fit into a tiny little 32 square foot community garden plot, in the middle of Brooklyn, right? It's kind of a tall order sometimes, but the things that you learn throughout the journey, I mean, even looking at my garden this season I introduced mycelium spores to the soil. For the first time, and something that I've noticed, and just like, oh, the
Mm,
magic of mycelial networks. Something that
magic.
I've noticed is that with the mycelial spores, I've got about 18 to 20 different like species and varieties of plants in this like 32 square foot space, which like is not the maximum. I have seen some crazy stuff out there, which is just like so inspiring to me. Um, but it's a lot of different
Yeah.
species, different varieties of plants growing in one
Yeah.
space, supporting one another. We've got flowers, we've got vegetables, we've got mushrooms, we've
Mm-hmm.
got like, but that mycelial network is helping everything grow
Mm-hmm.
at the same rate together at the same
It's
time.
yeah.
Like
And just like quick
witnessing plants
intermission.
share nutrients. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Go, go.
Okay, quick intermission for people who don't know. This is like
Yeah.
probably the most beautiful research I've ever read. And it's that plants share resources via fungal
Hmm.
networks, aka
Yes.
um, mycorrhizal networks, mycelium. And it is like these highways underneath the ground where fungi are sharing between trees, between plants. And it's part of the
Hmm.
reason why um, really diverse ecosystems thrive better than a mono, like only one crop, because they're sharing, but also the brilliance of natural ecosystems, because these plants evolved over millions of years to collaborate. And like, so you're obviously planting a garden, but like, a rainforest is the most harmonized, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
we man can't manufacture that, but
Right.
mushrooms share the now share. And mushrooms also, they store a lot of carbon from,
Yeah.
it's photosynthesis from the trees, from the plants. So actually, like, planting stuff is really good for everyone. And then we eat stuff that's, probably much more nutritious. um
Hmm.
it can make, I mean, there's a anyways, yeah, that's my little intermission. Okay, go.
Yeah. 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 No, totally. I appreciate that segue too. Because the beauty of those those mycelial networks is that if in a forest or in a garden, right, like what I see in my garden, with everything growing up together, it's because they're all sharing nutrients, they're all sharing water, right? Plants are able to speak to each other essentially through their roots and then through those mycelial networks. So if one plant over here in the forest or in the garden isn't getting enough nitrogen, isn't getting enough phosphorus, isn't getting enough water, isn't getting enough sunlight, signals will be sent, and that plant will be sent the nutrients it needs, perhaps from another plant that is producing a lot of nitrogen going down into its roots, going into the mycelial network, and going to a plant that needs that nitrogen but might produce more phosphorus, right? For other plants. And so it's a lesson from nature in collaboration, in connectedness,
Yeah.
in the way that like community care and community support and energetic exchange is absolutely fundamental, critical to our collective well-being, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it sort of it also makes me think about like that arrogance that we were talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is designed arrogance, mind you. It's arrogance created through capitalism, which we can
It's
get
arrogance
into a little
on
bit more.
purpose for a
Yeah,
very handful of people. And
totally.
yeah, um, yeah, and just to like add even more,
Hmm.
it's those plants that have extra, whether they just produce a ton because they're tall, they get all the sun, or they have more than they need. They can literally like give it to the younger ones, and
Yeah.
that's what these mother trees do. They like
Hmm.
give to the little ones. And but also even sensing like, oh, I can sense that there's a fungus, so I'm gonna like share resources so we all survive this. Or I'm gonna say,
Hmm.
you need to grow, you need to ripen fast. Like these really beautiful dynamic things, between a species of, you know um like a tree sharing with the same type of tree, but also between. And
Yeah,
um so this real like, let's look out for each other, because we
exactly.
actually all have enough between us.
Hmm.
And this like
Exactly.
beautiful idea that like we can actually all meaningfully contribute in our differences. So, different types of plants contribute different things nutritionally, chemically, as well as like helping those that aren't struggling or those who are younger or
Hmm.
older. And I think that's another really radical anti-capitalist idea of just like we can all contribute in the way that our bodies, our minds, our spirits can.
Mm.
And we actually
Mm.
don't all need to conform to 40 hours a week doing like these standardized ways of contributing that hurt us to do it. And like we've at least seen more accommodations in the past years, but you can't accommodate your way out of like how painful it is to be essentially a worker within
Yeah.
capitalism.
Yeah. And oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I wanna, yeah. I wanna present a visualization, right, to sort of like help send this message home. When we look at like a rainforest, right, and you have like certain trees grow really tall, right, because like um, they need to harness more sunlight, right, and then other
Yeah.
trees grow shorter, and other plants grow shorter than
Mhm.
that, and all of those plants like serve an ecosystem purpose,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so that's that idea of like, okay, like when this tree gets to a certain height where it no longer requires more sunlight,
Yeah.
or it's reached a limitation in like, this is how tall I can grow while still getting enough nutrients from the soil, while still getting enough rain, right, to exist and thrive and survive and contribute back to the rest of the ecological community, right? I'm going to stop growing so that I
Yeah.
can support, so that I can play my role in this ecosystem. What we see in modern day capitalism, imagine, or you don't even have to imagine because it's very easy to see it. Billionaires are the trees that grow to 10,000 feet,
Yeah.
leaving the rest of the plants to die below them, right? That is where, when we talk about limits to growth, when we talk
Yeah.
about like everything in nature has a limit to growth because there's this innate knowing, right? Um, this is how far I need to grow in order to survive, and now I'll give back, right? And now I'll
Yeah.
protect, right? Um, we, for some reason, as humans under capitalism, think we should just grow and grow and grow forever. And when we keep on growing and growing and growing, we are taking resources away
Yeah.
from those that we should be protecting, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I
it's
love that
yeah.
metaphor. I feel, I mean, it's intuitive for me. I hope it hits for others. And, I've literally experienced the thing where if you give a plant too much fertilizer, it will grow really quickly, but it's actually growing too fast in a way that's
Hmm.
unstable. And then you deplete the older sections of the plant, and like it's actually more growth than it can sustain, and it ends up
Yeah.
being worse for the plant. And so that's a very specific example. Maybe not everyone's experienced that, but um, yeah, like it's worse for us. It's worse for community. And there is this like the earth can actually support a lot of life. We've just now killed most life that isn't humans or isn't our food, and then that's gonna destroy us, unfortunately.
Yes.
So it's just, and like my thing that frustrates me most is like I can understand ignorance of being like, oh, we didn't know that this thing caused cancer because when we tested it for
Hmm.
2 years, it didn't cause cancer. So then we put in products, but over 40 years, it does cause cancer. That sucks.
Hmm.
Oops.
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
I can't deal with is the knowing of the impacts and still doing it. And so that's like why we're still driving cars that use oil. Um, why so the plastic industry, at first they made hard
Hmm.
plastic, which the plastic industry is
Hmm.
the oil industry because
Hmm.
plastic's made out of
Hmm.
oil.
Yeah.
So just in case that wasn't, people
Yeah.
didn't know that,
Abundantly
it's
clear.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
And so at first they
Which
made really hard
bio-based
plastic.
plastics also have issues too, but go ahead.
Totally. Totally. But
Yeah.
plastics were originally made to be really hard. And yes, there's many uses for that types of hard plastic. But as far as consumer goods, they were like, oh, well, we actually can't make money off things that people reuse because then they only need a
Mhm.
handful of them and then they're
Of course.
fine. What if we made single-use plastics? Brilliant. And now it's in everything. And even
Yeah.
though recycling, sorry, now I'm just ranting. I know you're my
No,
guest, but
please. Oh my God. No, this is so. Yes, go ahead.
um
Keep it going.
but like recycling basically like I mean, I'm sure you have some stats, but a very small percentage of things that have ever been made have actually been recycled.
Yeah. Yeah. Like generally speaking, like plastic, PET, like water bottles, right? Like
Yeah.
think about it like PET as the bottle of soda, right? Like 25 to 30% of that maybe on an annual basis is recycled in America.
Mm,
The other 70% is going straight into landfill,
yeah.
where it lasts for about 500 years, breaks down into microplastics, and during that breakdown process, releases an abundance of carbon emissions and methane into the atmosphere.
Great. And
Woo!
we all have microplastics in our blood.
Oh, in our, yeah,
All of
yeah, it's in
us.
everything.
Like the studies are just like, yep, 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 this population and this population. Oh,
Yep,
new like
yep,
fetuses,
yep,
newborn babies. It's in
yep,
breast milk. Like it's
yeah.
we've poisoned ourselves. But except like we have in many ways like individuals have, but that's because that was the choices they were given by
Hmm.
companies who
Hmm.
knew better at some point and continued to do
Hmm.
it and maybe offered one little like, oh, if you want to pay more you can have a greener quote unquote version
Of course.
like that. And that's what I
Greener
hear
version.
when you say corporate sustainability. It's like we're gonna maybe give you a green option but fundamentally your options don't change, and thus
Exactly.
we are going to continue to sell things and make money and pollute and contribute to the climate crisis and continue to the breakdown of ecosystems and contribute to your short-term and long-term health becoming worsened.
Of course. I mean, I think let's remember, like, I'm going to do this quite a bit because I want to really hone in on the fact that, like, what we are dealing with is so short in terms of the great
Mm,
expanse of Homo sapien, right? Homo sapien alone. Like,
yeah.
yeah, like,
Well,
let's
let's
not
so
go,
like
we're not going to, yeah.
our Earth is like how many million years old?
I don't remember how many millions. I know the universe or our galaxy is
Yeah.
what, 4 billion-ish
Our
around
yeah. So
there.
it's like sorry, universe. No, our universe. See, this is where I get confused. Yeah, I think our universe is
Yeah.
4 billion.
Yeah.
Our galaxy is like 3 million, and then it's like our like yeah. Anyways, um, but so there's
Mhm.
like the time scale of our universe and the time scale of our planet, and then the time scale of Homo sapiens, like,
Uh-huh.
and
Which is about
then
160,000 years. Yeah, Earth is
160,000
four and a
years,
half billion. I
four
just
and a
like
half billion. Okay,
gave it a good look up. 4.5 billion. The
four.
Earth has
No,
been
wait,
around
million or billion?
billion.
Billion.
Four
Okay,
age of Earth, Wikipedia, 4.5 billion
I
years.
love this. I watch the show Cosmos uh
All the
yearly, and including my favorite episode is
yeah,
the one where they go through the time scale of the universe. So like I'm
yeah,
actually a
yeah.
little embarrassed that these stats aren't hard boiled or hardwired into my brain, but that's okay for me. Songs from my middle school are deep in there. Everything else is a little
Totally.
more shallow.
Totally.
So
Memories, feelings,
yes.
emotions, the things that actually connect us, concepts,
That's in
emerge,
there.
all of the things that come through emergence, that's all in there. You know what I mean? And I would argue that, statistics, science, math, all of this stuff like helps us. They're tools, right? They
Yeah.
are a framework to help us understand, to measure. Um, but they're also quite, you know, capitalist in their being. Like I think even, maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but the
Yeah.
concept of like everything must be measured in order for us to understand and take action,
And categorized
um,
and
and
yeah,
categorized
broken
and
down into like
labeled and dissect. It
mhm.
all feeds it's all,
Yeah, I that
yeah.
brings me to a question I wanted that I know we wanted to discuss is like
Mhm, mhm,
going to, taking us on a history tour. So,
mhm, mhm.
going back to the roots of capitalism, before, like, where did we start? How did we get from, yeah, take us as far back as you want to go on this little
Yeah.
magic school bus ride through history.
Yeah. I mean, I'll do like a lightweight version. Honestly,
Beautiful.
I
Yes,
just
yes,
want to
yes.
plug again. I'm not sure if I actually plugged the name of the book. Jason Hickel, um, Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World.
Awesome.
Um,
Thank
does
you.
an excellent job at one, paying respects to all of the previous thinkers and leaders who have really like shaped all of the thoughts that come across in that book. But what I think that book and what Professor Hickel does really well is turns all of this conversation into layman's terms so that everyone can like
Mm,
really understand the like complex,
yeah.
interconnected but difficult to see um, pieces of how capitalism has created the circumstances that we're in a really digestible way. So want to
Yeah,
plug that
and
in.
let me just
You know?
say this as far as um like you and I are like two, I would say we're kind of nerds. Like we're kind of
Yeah.
data history nerds. Like we really want to
Yeah.
understand the nitty-gritty.
Mhm.
And so we're like bouncing between all these things. So if
Yeah.
you as a listener are like not following certain parts of it, like, our bad, we'll try, but also like we are kind of jumping in the deep end, so, like, it's okay. And I think when you're really steeped in an industry, like, you see it from a really deep perspective, and like I have that with public health and with understanding like what causes illness in humans, and like what do we really need both on an individual and like societal level. And I just know from my own experience, like, I'm like, oh, not everyone knows all of these things, and like it is big shit to wrap your head around. So, um, yeah, read books like that if you're interested, and
Yeah.
we'll try to give you the broad strokes and some data and everything in between. Cool.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So the layman's quick
Yeah.
wrap up. I guess we'll start like at the end of feudalism, right? So like it's 1400s ish. Um, there was this like golden age, something relatively recent that I learned about. Is I always was under the impression that like, oh, like feudalism, so like kings, queens, lords, the church, and serfs just like evolved into capitalism, right? Like that's the narrative that we like that we're told, right? Is like
Like it just kind of
feudalism turned into
happened.
capitalism, and capitalism is about like the free market economy and about like choice, pulling up by your bootstraps. Everyone has equal opportunity to um, create wealth in the world,
Mm,
to acquire capital in the world, right? But there's like this little bit of time that happened. What folks don't really talk about is that like we had feudalism, right? And then we had like the collapse of the like feudal lords and ladies and aristocracy. And there was this sort of like golden era revolution that occurred for about 75 ish or so years from the 1400s into the 1500s, I believe. But read on that just in case I'm wrong
mhm.
with the exact years. But we had this revolution where basically what we would consider to be the working class folks of society, like the serfs of society, the folks existing in poverty under these like kingdoms, right? Um, had very free and open access to this thing called the commons, what we like to call. So like it's a very simple term. We throw in this term called the commons. It just means like open, free, shareable
Yeah.
land, right? And so you had this period of time where European society, right? Like just everyday regular folks had the opportunity to subside. Folks were able to find a piece of land, build a house on it, grow their
Hmm.
own food, farm, cultivate, right? Um, and therefore no longer required support from lords, ladies, aristocracies, like all of the folks formerly in power in feudalism. Well,
Mm,
that's not great for the kings and the queens and the aristocrats and the churches because they created their wealth formerly. Serfs would grow food on land
yeah.
and provide some of that food to kings and queens, right?
Yeah.
Resources that were consumed by the elite were essentially like a tax from the serfs of their kingdom, right? And
Hmm.
so suddenly, when you have the fall of the aristocracy, you have all of these people who used to formerly be in like massive amounts of power, who suddenly have these massive populations of people who no longer are providing them with resources to consume, right? And so then you have this like this revolutionary period, right, that like turns into this like deep aggressive period of oppression and compression, um,
Hmm.
that we look at as like the enclosure of the commons, right? So like looking at like England, for example, like um all of this like common land where folks were able to like again live and grow their own food, and all of these forests that were just like, think back to like medieval movies that we look at, and like all of the forest around and all of the land, and folks like obviously like life wasn't great, right?
Yeah.
But like you
It was
had the
hard.
option, like
Hmm.
literally very hard, lots of disease, of course, right? But you
Yeah.
had the option as a person to live um to live freely, right? Like you had the choice of like, I'm only going to work as long as I need
Hmm.
to be able to feed myself and my family, to provide shelter. And so you had like this I see this as like the development of like the concept of laziness.
Yeah. Well, and so like I'll just add that
Yeah.
from yeah, I learned this in a medical anthropology class, but essentially that was
Mhm.
like I won't I don't want to say it was our healthiest time because again, like there were diseases, new
Of
like the
course,
young died,
science is
like
helpful, right?
yeah, like
It's
it's modern
okay. It should be a
antibiotics are
part of it,
helpful. There's
right?
but
Right.
we had the type of like stability that we didn't have when we were totally hunter gatherers, but it was before a lot of infectious diseases that came during industrialization, and then
Hmm. Hmm.
we now have like
Hmm.
diseases of industrialization, and some
Yeah.
places have both infectious and
Yeah.
those. But it's interesting, like yeah, being able to study bones and literally be able to
Yeah.
tell that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways, go
Yeah.
on. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about like cities, right? And like
yeah,
I did a bunch of research on like the development of like New York City's like water infrastructure and how that came to
it's
be.
crazy.
Public health, the amount of money that like had to be poured into the development of our public infrastructure, water pipes, right? Because people were dying
Yeah,
throughout the 1800s and
cholera,
the early 1900s from cholera
tuberculosis.
because of industrialization, right? Like
Yeah,
folks are being packed into cities to work in factories to generate profits for large corporations,
yeah,
and they're
and they would just throw
literally
their shit
pissing and
out the
shitting in
window.
water. Exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
so like these diseases and ailments literally came out of capitalism, literally
Yep.
came out of industrialization, right? And so I think that's part of what you're getting at here.
Hmm.
But yeah, continuing on this like development of capitalism, it's like, yeah, suddenly like the people of power, like the lords and ladies in the church, primarily monotheistic Christianity, the Catholic Church, the Church of England, etc., sort of like banded together and closed the commons. So then the common person no longer had the ability to grow their own food, to
Hmm.
live on land. They had to pay for food. They had to pay for land. They had to pay taxes in order to live their lives. And how do you pay for food and pay for land? You work for the bourgeoisie, for the new class.
Mm.
The aristocracy says, hey, come on, business owners, let's create a whole world where we're still at the top, but you can be close to the top. You can be close to the top. You can develop business, you can develop banking and industry and finance and all of these things, right? And you can live a pretty great life because you're designing the infrastructure, right? That then employs all of these lazy people who don't want to work anymore, so that we can get our resources back, so that we can get our rewards back, so that we can get free food again, so that we can get free land again, so that we can get free labor again, right? And so you have this like construction of like this upper middle class, this bourgeoisie class between the aristocracy and the church and, the working class folks. So that this like capitalist machine of exploitation can really like take off. And so like that's sort of like what I see and what I've come to understand is like this sort of like birth of capitalism and capitalist system, right? Is that like it
Yeah.
was a very, very intentional design from the very beginning to focus the accumulation of capital at the very top and to
Yeah.
force the everyday person into wage slavery in order to meet their basic needs of food, housing, right? And so that's this origin point that we always skip over. We always skip over. We think it's like, oh, kings and queens. Yeah, capitalism's a better version, right? Because like then
Hmm.
people have free will, people have free choice. It's not like people are like
Yeah.
just like owing everything to the queens, kings and queens. Well, we had that stage where like we weren't bound to lordship, right?
Yeah.
And all of the people in power came in and said, actually, you know what?
Flowers.
Here's capitalism. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think it's really important to point to that, really to stress that like capitalism from the very beginning was designed to exploit the
Hmm.
everyday person, was
Yeah.
designed to gather wealth for those at the very top by those at the very top, right?
Yeah.
And it's only about 500 years old. Homo sapiens have
Wow.
been around for 160,000 years. Our species, modern day Homo sapiens, have been around,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
What's
Okay.
500 years? Yeah, yeah,
So the planet is 4 billion years old, and it takes a long
yeah.
time for simple life to develop, an even longer time for more complex life forms to develop. And then only 160,000 years for, Homo sapiens, quote unquote, intelligent life. But I would argue all life is intelligent, just saying. Um, but for Homo sapiens to be developed, and then only, did you say 400 or 500?
500 years,
500
roughly. I mean, we're
years.
looking at like 14, 1500s.
Wow.
Yeah, so like,
And that's when like intense growth started. So like, like the human population just skyrocketed. So like when you look at a lot of
mhm,
the graphs, yes, in many ways humanity has benefited from capitalism, but also it's come at the cost of our planet. It's come at the cost, a complex relationship with health. Our health outcomes are,
mhm,
we do have long life expectancy. We're not dying of things like cholera, and we're dying of new
mhm,
things. And, young people are ending their lives either intentionally with
mhm.
heroin. People are suffering. Like
To numb
there's
out the pain.
people are dying from this intense heat. Guess who dies? The elderly. I
Yeah.
mean, many
And
age
folks that
groups,
don't have
but
access, folks
yeah.
throughout the global south who don't have access
Workers.
to air conditioning. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like things
Yeah.
that we totally take for granted, especially in
Yeah. So
America.
there's
Continue.
layers and
Yeah.
layers of, even though our life is better in many ways, um, it's also worse. And it's then we've gotten to the point where the pedal to the metal, like our worst is now going to get worse exponentially every year.
Hmm.
Like I love
Hmm.
seeing these headlines of like unexplainable water heat wave, the ocean is really hot in many places, and it's like, what do you mean unexplainable? We know
Yeah,
why it's
it's perfectly
happening.
explained. That's
It's
where science comes in handy, right? Because science can tell us, like, yeah, acidification of our oceans or like killing our coral
yeah,
reefs,
like
right?
we
Carbon
know this is
emissions
how
is
it
making the ocean
happens.
warmer. It's like, yeah, like it's we can point directly to it, and where does it all come from, right?
Yeah, I'm
From
sorry if you think that this
industrialization.
is like still out of the ordinary, but it's actually not.
Yeah,
Like if you've looked at
yeah,
headlines
it's
in
pretty
recent years, you're
clear
like, this
trends.
is we just have superstorms
IPCC
now. We have
AR6, please read it.
yeah.
Read it.
Whew. Yeah.
Ooh,
Mm.
God. Yeah, but that's all to say, like the vast majority of the destruction that has happened to this planet that is
Yeah.
causing climate change has happened in the last 200 years, you
Yeah.
know? Like capitalism as an entity has existed for less than 0.3% of human existence. Think about how small that is. Think about all of the hours in a day. Like we're at like what, like maybe 30 minutes to midnight. Don't quote me on that.
Wow.
Calculate
No,
it out
totally.
yourself. But like,
Wait,
you know
what's
what I
the
mean?
percentage again? Can you say that like
It,
slow? Can you let me soak it in?
yes. Yeah. So I believe so if we take roughly, we'll round
You
up, call it
you doing the
600
math?
years of capitalism, right? I'll just do a little. So we're looking, okay, so 0.375%.
Wow.
0.37, not 3.75%, 0.375% of modern Homo sapien existence, we have been in capitalism. And yet we think this is the be all and end all of everything. And we wonder why we're in so much pain every single day, right? Because we
Yeah.
didn't evolve to be a part of this system.
No. No.
I'm
We
getting heated.
we no, it's well, I
Yeah.
feel sad that it took this long for life to evolve to be, our bodies the way we are, like like at that moment in time. And then it took so little for us to do
Destroy
irreversible
it all.
damage and
It's
immense
so
suffering.
sad.
It's it's heartbreaking to really like hold that weight and be like, we took something so precious and we destroyed it for our own
Hmm.
greed.
Hmm. And for the greed at the top, right? Like
Yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
like I want to remind folks like greed exists in most people, right? And I don't think greed is inherent to humanity. Greed is inherent to capitalism, right? But like everyone alive today is very much been born into this system that
Yeah.
promotes greed, right? Because like greed is required to become safe within capitalism, right? Like it's about hoarding resources for yourself and yourself only, maybe those that you love directly, right? Like it is not designed to be a sharing economy, a selfless economy, a community um, environment, right? It is capitalism is built on greed, right? Um,
Yeah.
and
And I
it's
think like people
just
don't like, sorry to just,
no, please.
we, there's that the concept of like, can you actually make an ethical decision within capitalism? And for many of us, like we can't, like we don't have enough money to do anything other than than the kind of like supermarket, what's delivered to you,
Of
buying the
course.
stuff at Target. Like, you have to be very wealthy. And then it's like, well, how did you get that wealth? Probably some
Yeah,
greed.
exactly.
But it's sort of like,
Hmm.
being climbing the ladder, like working for a company that is capitalistic doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you a person like
Of
surviving
course.
within capitalism.
Exactly. 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 And we have to hold space for that and be kind to
Yeah.
ourselves and generous to one another, when we think about that, because I think a lot of folks, myself, like I've been through a really dark journey, of really like deconstructing my own role in this capitalist hellscape, right? You
Hmm.
know, and coming to a certain resolve to like what you just said, where it's like we are within a system that like
Yeah.
we didn't design, We a system that literally will take generations to dismantle, right? Like
Yeah.
unless there is a massive catastrophic event that collapses society as we know it, right? All at once, like we are looking at a multi-generational shift. And that's why
Yeah.
like the power of imagining something different is so important. It's so important to like hold on to that light at the end of the tunnel, that hope, to like hold hands with other folks who are feeling in their bodies so sick, so tired, so defeated, so robotic and just autopiloted, right, within the system. You know, most people choose the autopilot because it is the easiest way forward, right? Most people don't think critically about anything. Most people, I feel. I think a lot of people try to think as critically as they possibly can, right? But like, it's like the more you see, the more you see, and you can't unsee that. And when you open your eyes to see, it's
Painful.
painful.
Yeah.
It hurts. It hurts. And so people choose not to see, or when they do see, they rely on numbers
Yeah.
to help cope
Mm.
in the misery of it all, you know, in the pain of it all. I mean, which is, you know, I'm always a proponent. I had a really close friend, back in the day who just like really challenged me to like, I remember, she said something, she was like, you've got your blinders on really tight and it's
Um,
your choice. Do you want to take them off and start to see, or do you want to keep them on? And I think a lot of people, either consciously but mostly subconsciously, choose to keep those blinders on so that they don't have to observe and
yeah.
see the way that society really works and really harms everyone, including themselves, right?
Yep.
All
Yep.
driven by capitalism, right? Or
Mm,
you can choose to see, but once you see, you can't unsee, you can't unfeel that pain. I mean, I feel that's my journey to like getting to where I am at now, you know, and like the journey that I am excited to continue along for the rest of my life, right? In collaboration with all of the brilliant people, just working to imagine a different future, a better, more just and equitable future. Um,
mm,
you kind of have to move with that because if you
yeah.
do nothing, it will kill you.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, of course, I think about somatics in the body as you were talking about all of that because, um, yeah, I mean, oh, oh no, okay, my mic went out so briefly, so I don't know if anything got messed up, but here we are. Um, yeah, capitalism causes immense hurt, both mentally, emotionally, in our bodies. And it also like sells us this like vision of what life should be, what you should aspire
Hmm.
for, like
Hmm.
certain ideals. And if you just attain those, you'll be happy. Um, but when you actually feel into the impact, and like you said, it's sort of like go behind the curtain, see that you're
Hmm.
actually living in an illusion. And, most
Hmm.
people don't go to factories in
Yeah,
other
of course.
countries and see that. But I mean, oh my God, is that a like, here's what's behind the curtain.
Yeah,
Here's like the actual Wizard
yeah,
of Oz.
yeah.
Um, and it, to connect it to my own work, it's like I think people come to me and they're like wanting a fix. They're wanting a way so that they can survive within their job, within the way their life is within capitalism. And I totally understand. It's like, yes, like reduce your stress. Let's learn
Hmm.
to regulate your nervous system. Like I want you to have those skills. And I don't want to help people get so good at coping within capitalism that they continue to just be a exploited.
Yeah,
And like
of
I don't want
course.
you to stress manage your way to like being able to be okay. I actually want to help
Hmm.
people feel so deeply in what matters to them and to be able to have boundaries, to be able to know what they're about and go after it, to be able to be like, oh, these are my old patterns, but I'm going to slowly shift so they don't debilitate me or they don't hold me back or I don't have to numb out from them or like whatever it is.
Mhm.
And I'll let you share whatever you want, but like um I know we've had discussions on like on how do I be in this place of like knowing my vision and knowing what I'm walking towards
Mhm.
even when it's so hard. And like
Mhm.
you can't walk towards a better future if you're utterly wrecked by capitalism, which so many of us are, and it's no one's fault. Like people, it's like
Mhm.
we're all doing the best we can, but like that will continue. We will continue to all struggle until there's actual change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love I'll plug in like we work together in embodiment coaching. And I deeply appreciate our sessions because every single time, right, there's like some sort of opening up, some sort of awareness, some sort of like tracing back, like what is the pain? What is the turmoil? What is this energy vibrating within me? Where is it coming from? What is it trying to say? How do we observe it without judging it? How do we let it speak? How do we move with it? Right? Um, and listening to the way that we feel, to our innate knowing, right? To our innate knowing, the magic inside us. A close friend, Kendra Austin, an incredible, just creative dreamer, philosopher, the magic inside of us. The magic
Mm.
inside one another. If we listen to, if we trust our own instincts, if we trust the way that we feel, we already know that what we experience in day-to-day life, sometimes it's fucking magical, but a lot of times it's just causing pain. It's just hurting us, right? We already know that to be true. And so how do we get to the other side of action, right? Like how do we get over that hump? Like how do we trust our knowing and then move in the direction of like, this feels awful. How do we dream of a way to feel good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I want to go down this like
yeah, yeah,
art,
yeah, yeah,
imagination, awe, like
yeah.
all that, like this whole little galaxy of the stuff that actually allows us to be in like, I think this receptive, creative, like I can actually envision a new world or like, and like, yeah, go where you want to go with this invitation.
Yeah. Oh my God, thank you for that invitation because I believe that art is critical to imagining. Art, art is the art is the light at the end of the tunnel, right? Art is the call. Art is the imagination. Like I think about even like I mean visual arts, like a friend, Kazaya Harrell, an incredible, beautiful artist, just paints these fantastic, beautiful images. Just a celebration of like Black bodies, a
Mm,
celebration of like the beauty in everyday life and magic. I encourage you to look at her work. Just because when you look at her paintings, when I look at her paintings, I feel an overwhelming sense of joy. I feel an overwhelming
mm,
sense of hope. I feel an overwhelming sense of, hey, like, let's be naked and run free in the forest. Like, why can't we do that? Like, and then I
mhm,
go do it. Um, and it's beautiful and it feels so free. Let's look at the butterflies. Let's hang out with the birds and the bees. Like, how do we heal? Like, it invites us to heal, right? And then I think about like art through like music. Like, one of my sisters, like Bearcat, like this dope, dope underground DJ. Um, in like the New York scene, but like really very international. We went to a music festival. I had the honor and the privilege, which obviously I want to recognize. I have shitloads of privilege in this world. You know what I mean? Like pretty high up on the hierarchy of
yeah.
access, right? And with that privilege, we went to a music festival and it was this beautiful, beautiful, it's called Whole, Whole, 10 out of
Mm.
10 out of 10 recommend. I'm trying to like, what a brilliant taste of the future.
Mm.
She basically she brought us to it. Like she was playing at it with a bunch of like other folks, a bunch of artists in the scene. And throughout that time, we're with another sister, Dr. Rachel Grace Newman, who's a brilliant art historian of like African American art and diasporic art. Always like the general narrative is like tying in like racism, colonialism, capitalism, spirituality all together in these beautiful narratives and understandings of art. It's really so beautiful listening to her
Mm.
lectures, and then listening to like Bearcat play. Um, you can feel the summoning, right? You can feel the energy moving through your body. Anyway, we were at this beautiful music festival. It was a queer music festival, maybe like 9,000 folks or so. And it was in maybe an hour outside of Berlin, um, excuse me, in Germany. And it was pretty magic because, I mean, Germany is a really strange place. Their balance is really interesting. Like culturally, like I've never experienced a more militant observation of like there are rules, there are processes, we are cogs in machine. Like this is how the world is supposed to work and we will follow
Mm.
that, right? So like that was crazy to see. But the other side of that, the balance to that is that we had like a few hundred acres of land, right? Where a bunch of queers could literally be and do whoever they want to be, whatever they want to do. You know, like
Yeah.
people having running around naked, dancing under the moonlight, literally having sex in on the beach, in the beach, on the sunset, in the fields, kissing, making out, loving each other, smiling at each other, doing whatever drugs they needed, you know what I mean, in order to survive in this capitalist hellscape, right? Um, Without judgment, without policing is the most, oh God, what a destructive tool of capitalism. Anyway, um, the space was so free and so beautiful and really driven by, I know this is a long-winded description, but coming back to like Bearcat and some of the other DJs like Juliana Huxtable, are you kidding me? Queen, like, ugh, ugh, um,
You
Ariel
have great.
Zatina, another queen,
I
like
hope
I've
people are
got,
taking notes because you give great
yeah,
recs.
yeah, they're so, it's just like it just incredible
Mm.
artists, right? Um and getting to watch them just do their thing, flow the energy coming through them, through the music out to the
Mhm.
crowd of thousands and thousands of people, and watching, observing the way that folks just like could move together and feel and emote and process through music, through art, right? And the way that like folks were like really like live performances, right? Visual arts, outfits, expression, all of these things um influence the way we think about what's possible,
Mhm.
influences the way that we feel. Like when you're like listening to like a dope set and you reach this place where like when the music is good, you need nothing to reach nirvana,
Yeah.
nothing but the music. You know what I mean? Anybody
Yeah.
who's ever been on a real
Mhm.
dance floor understands that quite deeply. You
Absolutely.
know it. We
Yeah.
talk about dancing and movement in our embodiment practices all
Mhm.
the time, right? When you can reach that sense of joy and bliss and belonging and interconnectedness, you see a version of the way that you can feel, the way that others can feel, the way that you can feel together and collectively. And once you feel that and you see that, you can't unsee that. You can't turn back. And so when you
Yep.
return to America's police state, founded on
Mm-hmm.
enslavement, and you feel the tension between everybody, and you
Yeah.
feel that everyone is just on edge all the time, you start to ask, why is everybody on edge all the time?
Why do we have to
Why do we
be
all
like
feel
this?
terrible? Why do we
It
have to
felt
be
so
like
great over
this?
there. Yeah.
Yeah. And like then you start to connect these dots and you're like, oh, like I feel an edge because I'm impatient. Why am I impatient? Because I don't feel that I have enough time. Why don't I feel like I have enough time? Because my time is commodified by
Mm-hmm.
capitalism. Because this system that we live within is forcing us to be very careful and intentional about the free time that we have, because the vast majority of our time on this planet is spent in wage slavery, working, working for the
Yeah.
capitalist machine, right? And so like when you start to connect these dots and really try to like listen
Mm-hmm.
and feel and see the through lines, it just becomes, yeah, abundantly clear what we're dealing with on a daily basis, right? And so, coming back to the role of art, it's like art allows us to imagine differently, to
Mm-hmm.
feel differently. I think that's the key. Like art can be this exists in so many ways, right? But like at the end of the day, art is about feeling. It's about feeling the energy, a transmittance of energy and feeling the emotional response to that, right? And letting that
Yeah.
energy envelop you.
Did you read
Um,
the
and
book
once you
Awe?
feel something else. Did I read the book? Ah,
I think I
no,
sent
I
you an
didn't. But I
article or
listened to a
two on
brilliant
it.
podcast. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
listened to, there was a podcast. Well, you had a podcast episode that was talking about being
Yeah.
awestruck, and then I listened to another podcast about being awestruck on,
Yeah. Well,
I think
there's a
it's
book
Vox's explained, but
called
yeah,
Awe, and it's about the research of awe. And
yeah.
it's I mean, it's kind of what I hear you saying, and it's interesting because like we've actually talked about it in several ways already. So awe is just like this like feeling of openness and kind of like wonder at like something bigger. And we can really feel that with groups of people, like you're talking about, like in movement with them.
Mm-hmm.
Collective effervescence is that of just like we are
Mm.
feeling each other. It's kind of like
Together,
collective
yeah.
resonance, nature. We can feel it
Yeah.
at like the beauty of morality and of other
Mm-hmm.
beings, music.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's others, but what's interesting is when what's happening there is like our vagus nerve is getting stimulated. We're more calm. We
Mm.
we actually think more in the like group sense. And when we are asked to like identify ourselves, we actually like feel we're like less self-centered and more like oriented to a group belonging.
Mm.
And you're more likely to like even donate to charity, like all really
Mm-hmm.
orients us towards the collective and towards what is best for the collective in a way that like just feels good and generous. And I really like I'm like, however you feel awe and joy and pleasure and like connection to community, go do that, my friend. There's no one right way. And the dance floor
Mm-hmm.
is such a sacred place for many of us. Some
Mm-hmm.
people it's totally a party scene. Some people it is I mean, I really view it as like
It's my
the way
church,
it's my
personally.
church. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nature and dancing.
Nature also is all like
Yeah.
it's nature and dancing. You know what I mean? Like I like there are so many like even like at my consultancy, like I have never worked with such like a brilliant group of like purpose-driven individuals. Like I cannot stress enough how much I like have genuine love for every single person that I work with. Like it's
Yeah.
crazy. And I think that
Mm,
comes from the fact that we are all tied together around this shared purpose of like how do we use the tools that we have within the system we have to seek improvement in the world, the way the world works, right? While also
mhm.
recognizing like and working toward the long-term systemic changes, right? But there's this nuance, there's this understanding, and this camaraderie in community. But a lot of those folks like the dance floor isn't their thing, but nature is.
Nature
Going
is,
on a
yeah.
hike, going camping, being out,
Yeah.
like summiting and reaching beautiful views, but it all comes back to that sense of awe that we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
Like It's that sense, that knowing that we are not alone, that we are all interconnected, that we are all together. You can feel that energy. If you open
Yeah.
up to it, if you try to open up to that for half a second, you are locked in. You know what I mean? For the
Hmm.
ride. And
It's, yeah, I mean, it's
it's
kind of like
magical.
there's, and it's, awe is an embodied experience. It can
Yeah.
sometimes be, like science for me produces awe. Thinking about how old the planet is, how old the universe is, like that produces
Mm-hmm,
awe.
hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but the experience of awe is in our bodies, and also the suffering caused by capitalism is in our bodies, and it can cause
Mm-hmm,
disconnection. And yet,
mm-hmm.
so this is why, like, I really think whether it's somatics or it's yoga or it's dance or like whatever you do to support your body, like we have to both grieve and like be able to have the capacity to feel the real
Mm-hmm,
sadness, the challenging
mm-hmm.
emotions, the real suffering from our world, from capitalism, and
Yeah,
develop the capacity to on purpose feel pleasure and joy and awe, because that's what
hmm,
makes us resilient. That's what makes us orienting
exactly.
towards this future that we need
Yeah.
to, like, you know make happen as a group,
Yes.
and like
Leaning
now.
into, oh, yes, leaning into community, leaning into awe,
Yeah.
being connected is the post-capitalist antidote, right? It's just, weaving the capitalist objective in here again, right? Like capitalism is designed to disconnect us. And I say that, and then I'll try to do a little, illustration here, right? But it's like we are social beings. We are meant to exist in communion with each other, right? Just like all other living beings. It's like we are nature. We are not separate. You know what I mean? Capitalism like exists like gosh, capitalism, and here's where science does get problematic. Western science, the development of Western science through the Enlightenment, where like the core objective is to destroy animism, right? Like indigenous folks, like indigenous societies, like all of our ancestors, not just talking about like indigenous, like to what is now North America, right? Um, Understood that we must rely on one another to seek fulfillment, and understood that like that tree and that person are all part of the same thing, right? We're all living beings, right? Capitalism and science, capitalism drove science and emphasizes science, right? As like this end all and be all to strip us from a spiritual awareness, to strip us from being tapped in, to strip us from understanding that everything is living, everything deserves our respect and reciprocity, so that we can dehumanize physical resources and human resources, i.e., enslavement, right? We can dehumanize other humans to allow us to exploit them for the generation of capital, right? And so that's like when I say that like collectivism and coming together and feeling each other, dancing with each other, seeing with each other, laughing, loving, smiling, whatever you want to do, that love is the only way forward. It is the antithesis of what capitalism wants us to do. Like capitalism further separates us. Like, look at our like modern consumer society, right? I have a close friend, love her to death, Carla Gonzalez. She wrote this like beautiful paper on consumer behavior, that I think she's working on getting it published now. But just talking about how like consumerism, like we all feel so alone in life, right? By design, because if we feel lonely, our first inclination in under modern like neoliberal capitalism is to like buy something to feel better, right? the more alone we feel, the more money, the more consumption we like lean
Yeah.
into, right? To sort of like solve that feeling and get to another place. And like capitalism by design separates us because the further separated we are, like this idea of like a nuclear family, like a man, a woman, 2.5 children, and a fence, right? That strips us away from like the idea of like community care, raising kids in a village, right? Like growing food together, right? Um, if we're separated into our little nuclear families, then we have to pay for childcare. Then we have to pay for our food because there's no one in the community helping us to grow the food. Then we have to pay to drive to work. We have to pay for all of these things that like our ancestors used to just help each other do, right?
Yeah. It was just
um
like how it was structured. These needs were met. We all shared the distribution of the labor, of the time, of the resources from the labor. Yeah. Yeah. It's not working great,
wild.
folks. I think our
Wild.
generation is like
Wild.
really we're really being like, oh wait, God, homeownership is like
Yeah,
more out of reach. Childcare is more out
yeah,
of reach. All these things that
yeah,
that were more attainable for like the quote unquote middle class are harder. Um,
yeah.
wow. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I think I want to ask
We have.
my final
Yeah.
question, which is basically to like if there's any things that you kind of want to weave together and what is like sort of you're like, okay, great. You listened to this interview, you maybe felt so much alignment. You were like, oh my God, I agree, I agree. Yes, yes, yes. What can someone do? What do you recommend they explore? Like, are there key
Oh my gosh.
takeaways? Take what you
Yes.
want.
Oh my
No
gosh, this is going to
pressure.
be kind of open-ended. I mean, like everything else, right? Because I think the overarching like narrative here too, and something that like I'm not going to apologize for like this conversation just kind of going in many directions because it's really important when we think
Yeah.
about like how systemic everything is systemic, everything is connected, every idea is connected, right? And so I encourage folks first and foremost, start if you're not already not trying to categorize things and put them into different boxes and talking about things and feeling things and looking at things in bite-sized pieces. I encourage you to step back and allow the expanse of all of the interconnectedness of life and ideas to live, to come about when they should come about, to take away anything from this conversation now, and maybe you come back and take something else away later, right? Let's
Hmm.
get rid of separation and let's invest in coming together and bringing things together and leaning into that flow. So that first and foremost. I would love to first drop in some like folks who like really have been incredibly influential in just like feeding and guiding me along in my own journey, right?
Yeah, and
Who
I'll link
obviously have their own teachers. Yeah,
we'll link below in the show notes to like any stuff that Devon thinks is relevant. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna throw out some like brilliant thinkers, writers, philosophers, folks that I would encourage researching more into, whether it be listening to their podcasts, reading their books, going into the sources within their books to then, find more stuff to explore. But like huge influences, Celine Simon, love her. Also, something I want to say first before going into it is like pedestalization sucks. That's not what we're
Yeah.
here to do. You know what I mean? Like, let's not pedestalize
We're all
people. Like,
humans.
we are all people. We're all humans, right? We're all in the same. We're just trying to share and learn from each other, right? And help each other um, live sweetly and collectively. Celine Saman, an incredible thinker, speaker, activist, writer, um, beer, liver, right? Someone who just isn't afraid to like speak on things, who really started to like um, shift my perspective and like connecting like spirituality and science, and understanding that like those are two very interconnected things, and we like kick spirituality out the window,
Hmm.
and just focus on hard science. But it's like, ugh, that's wrong and sad. Celine Simon, executive director of the Slow Factory Foundation, really, really encourage you to look into their. Aja Barber does some like incredible, just like thought leadership and commentary around like the fast fashion space, and just like thinking about like consumption and overconsumption in general. Like brilliant words. Has this book Consumed, that is super easy to read and like really mind opening, for a lot of folks. Aisha Barenblatt, the founder of Remake, the fashion organization that works, to find fair, livable wage, fair labor, fair pay for folks within the fashion supply chain, especially women, which make up like most of the labor, like brown BIPOC women in the labor chain. Um, I love really like the work of Dr. Vandana Shiva, Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who were scientists, like trained
Hmm.
scientists who did the whole thing, and like went down like the master's and doctorate route, right? Like both realizing like what is this, right? Like we are
Yeah.
like how do we move away from just like really trying to like inspect everything through this like Western scientific lens, right? Trusting
Mm.
their innate knowing that like there are things that we don't understand and that we can't define through proof and observation and having a control, right? In an experiment, right? I mean, America is one big capitalist experiment, like doesn't seem to have
It's
gone too
not
well
going
for us.
well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
those
think,
are great.
yeah, yeah, and just, some folks, some podcasts. I love the Upstream podcast, Della Duncan, Robert Raymond, listen to that all the time. They have brilliant guests on there just talking about like what are the upstream causes to this capitalist hellscape that we live in and how can we imagine a different and better collective future. Kamea Shane, Green Dreamer, love, love, love. Kristen Godsee's books on utopia, applied utopia.
Mm.
How can we learn from the past experiments? Um, you know, Dr. Ayanna Johnson, All We Can
Yeah.
Save, just this beautiful amalgamation of works from so many activists and players in like the climate and sustainability and social justice space, painting a inspirational vision of, you know, a woman-led path toward creating a just and equitable future. Of course, Marx and Engels. I will always plug the Communist Manifesto because I find that to be required reading for any sort of alternative left-leaning, like, if capitalism is the anti, you know what I mean? If we're trying to move away
Hmm.
from it, like, you got to get into some of that at
Yeah.
least. And then,
Well, that's
my friend Nia, I also want to plug her too.
yeah.
She's a brilliant, just like, yeah, like, just a brilliant writer and fellow post-capitalist dreamer. Like we go like so hard, like we'll just get in the conversation and just go, 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 go. But anyway, I drop all of this in because I want everyone
Yeah.
to like, be able to take what you can from that and do your own
Hmm.
exploration, right? And to like pay tribute to like folks that have changed my existence. You know what I mean? That hopefully will change our shared existence through me being a vessel for
Yeah.
continuing that
Yeah.
change.
And
Yeah.
all of those links will be below. And, absolutely, like to your point, I think I take a really broad view of what
Mm.
art can be. I consider myself an
Hmm.
artist,
Hmm.
and that's been very liberating. And just consuming different perspectives and looking at these problems from different layers, is really beneficial. And some of those books, some of those podcasts I know and are amazing, some I don't know, and I can't wait to listen to. Yeah, well, this has been just such an amazing conversation. So thank you so
Yes.
much for chatting with me today. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, likewise. I uh, thank you so much for holding space for this. And really like with your understanding of like human health, I mean like let's, you've done a lot of work and had a lot of experience in the space, and now like your like embodiment and somatics practices and the way that you innately you understand what we're talking about here and helping to guide healing. So yeah, I just
Thank you.
appreciate you for making the time and for holding space for this conversation today.
Thank you. And I forgot about this, but yeah, shameless plug for my
Mm,
group program
mm-hmm.
Body Language Lab, which you're
Yeah,
actually going to be part of.
yeah, yeah. I'm
So,
so excited.
my whole premise is like really deepen your connection with your body, your ability to feel and be with those sensations and learn your unique body's language. I'll teach you some kinds of science and concepts, as well as give you a somatic toolkit that you get to figure out what works for you when. But I really think it's like whether you're an artist, whether you are a change maker, whether you're just trying to survive, like we need to develop our own tools and our own capacity and not rely on, whether it's scrolling or alcohol or whatever ways that we're coping with capitalism. And,
Mm,
you know, there's different ways to be contributing to social change, but being the most resourced, the most regulated, the most in our bodies and our intuition, like that's essential for whatever way it is right for you. And I actually think that like the more of us who are embodied and are actually feeling and are actually acting on purpose, like that's the best chance we have for social change. So,
mm,
come whether it's for the personal or for the
mm,
collective, it's going to be a good time. Yeah. Mm.
mm.
Okay.